now that I've shared that, I want to share my personal story. Like I always say, this is a story that I've told in narrative form, but it is 100% factual. I am not making anything up. The name of this story is called Blindsided. Story, story, story. Once upon a time, time. The first memory I have of swimming comes from when I was just shy of 6 years old. My family was living in Lagos, Nigeria, and my dad had a love for exclusive sports clubs, places like Ikoyi Club or Apapa Club. If you know, you know. These were the spots when I was young, and they offered everything from tennis to squash to swimming, so we spent many a weekend at these clubs. For me, the pool was where I first met my arch nemesis, water. I remember vividly hanging out with a bunch of other kids at the shallow end of the pool at the club. This was the safe zone as decreed by our parents. They'd placed us there and firmly instructed, do not leave this area. Meanwhile, most of the adults stayed dry, lounging on chairs by the pool, sipping drinks and chatting, and notably, avoiding water. Classic Niger style. Except for a select few like my dad who actually knew how to swim. Well, kids being kids, we got curious, especially as we watched the adults who were swimming. The shallow end was too boring. We wanted adventure. Slowly but surely, we inched closer to the forbidden zone. It wasn't the deep end, but for our tiny bodies, it might as well have been the Atlantic Ocean. The water rose higher on our legs, and suddenly, it felt like we were daring something impossible. My friends started experimenting, leaning into the water, floating on their stomachs, and moving their arms in ways that at the time looked magical. I thought to myself, I can do that too. The first time I tried to do so, I sank. Not just sank, I panicked. I flailed. I choked on water, and I scrambled back up in pure terror. But I didn't want to give up. I thought to myself, maybe I just did it wrong. So I tried again. Same result. And again. And again. Same result. Each time, my confidence took another hit. My friends seemed to be having the time of their lives, gliding and splashing like little pros. And me, well, unfortunately, I eventually retreated back to the safety of the shallow end. Sitting there, I felt this sinking feeling that had nothing to do with the water. I stared back at the distance between me and my daring friends, and that was the moment I realized something unsettling. I'm not like them. But I didn't know why. This one experience was the defining moment that created in me a fear of the water. I can recall other social events with my family after that moment where pools were involved, and I notably avoided them like the plague. By the time I was 11, my family had moved to the US, and swimming returned to haunt me. Somehow, I ended up in swimming classes at the YMCA. I don't remember how it started. Perhaps it was my parents trying to instill a life skill that they thought I should have. What I do remember vividly is the first day of classes. There I was, taller, bigger, and notably older than the children surrounding me. They were 4, 5, maybe 6 years old at best, while I stood there at the ripe old age of 11, towering over them. In America, swimming isn't optional. It's a basic life skill, and most kids learn well before they turn 10. I had hoped that these lessons would help me rewrite my humiliating history with water. Oh, how I hoped. But hope, it seemed, was a luxury that I couldn't afford. The first lesson began at the shallow end, where our instructor demonstrated basic movements to help us feel comfortable in the water. It all seemed manageable, until the lesson shifted to things that required trust. Floating on our stomachs, lying back on the water, surrendering ourselves to its hold. I watched the younger kids, one by one, attempt the moves with ease. They popped out of the water beaming, their faces filled with joy and pride. Then it was my turn. I tried to mimic them. I leaned forward, extended my arms, and surrendered. At least I thought I did. The water responded by swallowing me. I choked, coughed, flailed, and scrambled right back to the surface. The water reminded me of my failures. It wasn't just the sinking. It was the sensation of regression, The frustration of watching children half my age succeed where I couldn't. I was 11, but in those moments, I felt like that 6-year-old girl again, the one who had retreated from her peers to the shallow end because she couldn't keep up. Only this time, these weren't even my peers. They were toddlers. It was humiliating. I tried the lessons multiple times. Beginner's class, always, and each time I watched the others progress. They would graduate to new techniques, the deeper end of the pool, and brighter smiles, while I stayed behind, rooted in the shallow end, the same motions, the same failures. It got so bad for me emotionally that just the smell of chlorine became a trigger. Every time I had a lesson, I would reach the YMCA locker room to prepare for my classes, smell the chlorine, and begin to tremble, not from the cold, but from the certainty that the next 45 minutes would bring nothing but humiliation. Eventually, I quit. I announced to my parents that I was done, that I wouldn't endure another second of failure. My self-esteem had taken too many hits, and as I remembered it, they let me be. But I wasn't off the hook. High school came along with its mandatory PE program. Graduation required successful completion of a PE swimming class, a fact that filled me with the familiar sense of doom. My high school boasted not one, but two pools, a shallow one for beginners and a deep, Olympic-sized one for the school's swim team. On the first day, the PE instructors gathered us for a test to see what our existing skills were. Swim to the other side, they instructed. One by one, my classmates took their turns, gliding confidently to the opposite end of the pool. I stood at the edge of the pool, shivering, chlorine thick in the air, the memories of my failures rushing back. When my turn came, I got in the pool and nervously centered myself in my swim lane. I pushed off the wall, desperate to prove something, anything. I flailed, kicking and splashing, convinced that I was making progress. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I looked back and I realized I had moved only 5 feet. I looked up at the PE teacher shamefully as she towered over me with her note-taking clipboard in hand. She gestured for me to keep going, but I couldn't. I shook my head at her slowly, waded slowly in the water to the other end, wade in the water, and I simply accepted my fate, beginner's class, again. I spent that semester in the shallow end, my progress minor, my confidence non-existent. There was one silver lining, an Indian girl in my class who shared a similar struggle as I did. She had recently moved to the US and had never had access to pools back home. For a while, we were companions in failure, but near the end of the semester, even she broke through. One day, as we headed to the pool together, I assumed we would both settle into the shallow pool as usual. But as we walked to it, she suddenly turned and stopped at the deep pool. I froze, watching as she dove in, swam to the other side, and emerged victorious. The shame I felt in that moment was indescribable. She had done what I still couldn't. She had left me behind. Again, I was stuck, unable to move forward, carrying the weight of years of failure. By this point, I had amassed a decade of defeat in water, 10 years of trying, and 10 years of not knowing why I couldn't float, couldn't progress, and couldn't break through. Swimming wasn't just a skill that I lacked. It had become a symbol of everything I couldn't overcome. The shallow end was also not just a place in the pool. It was a place where I dwelled, a place I felt condemned to stay in. And still, I didn't know why. That is, until the day I sat in the optometrist's chair. I did the eye chart test, and the optometrist revealed what I had long ignored. I had severe myopia. As a child, I'd been given glasses, but I stubbornly refused to wear them because back then, in my very early years, my vision had been crystal clear. I couldn't accept that over time, the sharpness of my eyes had blurred. This time, though, I had no choice. When I finally slipped on my new glasses, the world around me transformed. Colors popped, edges sharpened, and suddenly I realized how much I had been missing, not just of the pool, but of the world. It wasn't just clarity I had been lacking, it was precision. Then it hit me. All of those humiliating failures in the pool, all the years of frustration and self-doubt, they weren't because I was body dumb. I simply couldn't see. I remember the instructors from my first swimming classes in America, how they would stand at the shallow end, demonstrating techniques step by step. They had tried so hard to help me, but the moment they stepped just a few feet away from me to show me their moves, their gestures blurred and their faces blurred into an indecipherable mush. My eyes couldn't track them. I hadn't realized it at the time, but I wasn't failing to understand them. I was failing to see. I wasn't slow to learn, as swimming had made me feel I was for many years. I was just blind to see what I needed to stay afloat. It wasn't until after college that I decided to do something about this revelation. By then, I had started a career in consulting, which required weekly travels and stays in various hotels. Almost all of the hotels had pools, shallow pools. I decided one night that I would use the pools to learn how to swim. I stumbled across a series of swimming tutorials on YouTube, and I thought to myself, why not? Each night, I would come back from work, study a video tutorial intently, committing every swimming motion to memory. Then, armed with prescription goggles that gave me perfect underwater vision, I headed to the hotel pool. For the first time in my life, I could truly see under the water. And for the first time, swimming didn't feel like a battle. To my astonishment, I discovered something about myself. I loved the water. This liquid nemesis that had haunted me for years actually transformed into something of a friend. With clear vision, swimming came naturally to me. Night after night, I practiced in those hotel pools, mimicking the steps I'd watched in the videos. I actually learned some basics very quickly. The freestyle stroke, the backstroke, and even back floating for survival. Each stroke was a triumph, a quiet reclaiming of the confidence that I thought I'd lost forever. These days, I've taken my swimming to the next level. I'm not there yet, but I've come far. I can swim from the shallow end of the pool to the deep end of the pool. I can start with the freestyle, glide over and swim on my back, and then turn over again and freestyle to the other end. For someone who spent 20 years flailing in the water, that's an accomplishment worth celebrating.